Welcome everyone to the Latin America Regional Advisory Committee's webinar series, A Path to a Career in Geophysics. The SCG Latin America Regional Advisory Committee and myself, Lori Weitzel, will serve as your hosts for today's webinar. Before we begin, the model for this webinar will be a short presentation followed by an extended question and answer session. You can ask questions during and also after the presentation. If you'd like to ask questions, please raise your hand in the webinar interface and or use the question and answer box to type in your questions. Today's presenter is Sergio Chavez-Perez, who is the chair of the SCG Latin America Regional Advisory Committee. He was born in Mexico City. He received a BS degree in geophysical engineering from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, in 1984, and a master's in exploration geophysics from the University of South Carolina in 1987. He began his work as an exploration seismologist in Mexico City at the Mexican Petroleum Institute in 1987. Later, he was appointed Research Associate of Engineering Seismology at the Center for Seismic Research from 1987 to 1992, and an adjunct professor of exploration seismology at UNAM from 1987 to 1992. He went back to the United States in 1992 to pursue his PhD in exploration seismology at the Seismological Lab of the University of Nevada at Reno. He obtained his PhD in December of 1997, and since January of 1998, has been a research geophysicist at the Mexican Petroleum Institute, following technology for IMP and PEMEX. He has also been an adjunct professor of exploration seismology at UNAM from 1999 through 2014 and 2016 to present, and is also an adjunct professor at the University of Utah in the United States from 2004 to 2014. His areas of professional interest are seismic imaging, migration modeling, tomography and inversion, data processing and wave field transformation, interpretation of seismic data for structural, stratigraphic, and reservoir and site characterization targets, and seismic wave propagation. He became an SCG member, the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, in 1981 during his undergraduate years in Mexico City. Was a candidate for vice president of SCG in 2007, was an honorary lecturer for Latin America in 2015, and currently serves as the associate editor for Geophysics, Practice Histories, and Interpretation Methods. He is a reviewer for the Journal of Interpretation, chair of the Latin America Regional Advisory Committee, is part of the Translation Committee, vice chair of the Research Committee, and member of the Global Affairs Committee. Additionally, Sergio serves as a reviewer, session and workshop organizer during the SCG annual meetings. Sergio is also a member of AAPG, AGU, OMHE, EAGE, GCS, SCPM, GSA, and GSH. Without further ado, Sergio, please take us away.
Good morning. This is the agenda that I will use for today's presentation. So apart from the introduction, I'm going to say something about my education, professional experience, what happens when you mentor people, some suggestions concerning insights for building a career, which is one of the main points about this webinar series. Then I will try to summarize and foster some questions. And of course, at the end, I will have to acknowledge lots of people, mostly the main organizer, Lori, who introduced me a few minutes back. Let's jump into the introduction. So the main goal of the webinar is to present a short story of the speaker and how he has dealt with the challenges as well as the successes along the way. And in order to do that, I have to tell you something about who I am and what I am. I decided to use this picture from a rather interesting lady who is a political star in the US. She's only 29, and she's making a real revolution in the US. And notice that she uses two last names, Ocasio-Cortez. Her name is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In the same fashion, my name is Sergio Chavez-Perez in Spanish, or Sergio Chavez-Perez. When you go to the US, your name changes usually. And I use a hyphen to join my father's name and my mother's name, which is a typical tradition in the Spanish-speaking countries. So that's why the hyphen, and I retain the accents whenever possible, even though they are not pronounced in English. So where do I come from? I grew up in a lower middle class, in a rather small family environment. At the time, we were only 2 kids, which was a big deal. During those years, usually families in Mexico had 4, 6, or even 8 kids. So one of our main advantages was that we could go on vacation, we could get all the books, we could eat more than some of the large families that we had in the neighborhood. So that was a key point. I was reasonably well fed when I was a kid, and I had the chance to do pretty much as I pleased. So what I have tried to be. So what I think I am is not only a geophysicist, but I try to become a seismologist, and then go into the exploration seismologist part. As you heard Lori presenting at the beginning, I did a bit of engineering seismology, and during my education and practice, I've been doing exploration seismology applications. Tectonic mostly during my education, and oil-related during my career. And I tend to define myself as part of a seismic imaging group. I try to follow technology. I play sort of like a gatekeeper in the things that I think I know. And I've been following pseudo-academic activities since I finished my PhD. Now, I used to be young and beautiful, as you can see in this one. Now, years later, I'm still beautiful, but not that young anymore. And I'm getting smaller, my hair is getting gray. I'm losing more and more hair, but that's what life makes to you after a few years. Before you realize it, it's been like 30 or more years after you began your development as a professional. So what made a difference from my perspective? It may sound a bit silly, but to me it was a big revolution when I started reading, because that's what I do the most in my professional and personal life. And that happens in 1966 when I was 5 years old. Then the transition to become bilingual became a real need for me and something I really enjoyed. And that began when I was about 17 years old, when I was beginning college. And that happened because I noticed most of my classmates were pretty good. So I had to get better. And that was really, really a big difference, to be able to learn and improve my English. Then the third life-changing event was when I finished my bachelor's degree. I will tell you why in a few more minutes. And of course, the most recent one is when I got married, and then when I pursued my PhD degree in the US. Those, apart from other events, are to me the most relevant life-changing events in my life so far. That doesn't mean that after that life gets boring. It's more like it's not as disruptive as it was mostly during the last 2 bullets that you're watching on the screen. Education. So you heard a lot about the introduction in terms of where I went to school and so on. So I will skip some of the details that Lori described, but I will try to say something that may be interesting in terms of how come that I got into geophysics. So when you're in Mexico in the high school period, I was very confused because I felt attracted to physics, to petroleum engineering, to geological engineering, as well as geophysical engineering. Notice that everything says engineering. So if you study geophysics in Mexico, you have to be an engineer. Same as a geologist, same as a mining engineer, same as a petroleum engineer. So we all go to the School of Engineering, which is sort of unusual as compared with, say, the US, because you usually go to the School of Science unless you go to petroleum engineering. So anyway, one day before deciding which career I would follow, I went for geophysical engineering. That was the best option that I considered at the time. Later on, when I was in college, one of the best suggestions that I received was to become an SEG member. And I became a member since I was 20 years old. And to me, that was a big deal because it really made a difference. It gave me a sense of what geophysics was about through the journal Geophysics, through the journal The Leading Edge. And I became interested in what I call, and what I thought it was nice, as exploration seismology. I wasn't sure what the hell that was, but I was attracted because of the seismic images, because of the relationship with the typical earthquake seismology that I knew a bit. And so that it was kind of an accident since I was in my high school years. And then little by little, I got convinced that I was able to enjoy this field. But again, I don't think I got a very clear idea until I was like 22 or 23 about what the hell geophysics was all about. Education. There you can see the titles of my bachelor from bottom to top, from my bachelor's, master's, and PhD thesis, along with the names of my advisors: Francisco Sanchez Esma in Mexico City, Richard Williams in South Carolina, he's now in Russia, and John Louis, who's still at the University of Nevada, Reno. Of course, these guys made a big influence, a great influence in my life at every stage. What about the language? Sometimes you really get confused with the language, and sometimes we make mistakes, or our circuits get really crossed over in terms of which one is good. So I've always tried to be very, very careful, even though I do have a clear accent. I always try to be very, very careful with English as well as with Spanish. And let me give you a quick comment about something, because I'm going to say something about nationalism. Once I told a Colombian friend, older than me, that I really admired the Venezuelans because they were very nationalistic. And he told me, no, you're wrong. The most nationalistic guys that I know from Latin America are the Mexicans. And he's probably correct, because lots of us are very, very nationalistic. And my master's advisor included that in a letter of recommendation when I looked funding from the American Geophysical Union. And the funding did work to present my master's work, but one of the key lines that he included was sort of like, Sergio doesn't have any intention about staying in the US, and he's very, very nationalistic. So that has crafted my career, because it does describe the way I feel. And even though I do enjoy going to the US all the time, I go there every year since I was 22 years old, I still feel much more, I still feel I belong much more on the other side of the border. So anyway, this is a very famous quote from a very famous Cuban, and that's the way I feel. That's the way I have always felt. Okay, you go to the US, you study, you get better, you feel you're a much better professional, then you have to go back and help your community. And that's what I have tried along all these years. So I've always seen the US as a great source of education. It has always improved my abilities, or that's what I think. And I have always tried to give something back to the country that has sponsored all my education. Now, professional experience. So to me, whenever you get some money, that means work. So I started getting money when I was a research assistant at UNAM in Mexico City, and also when I pursued my master's at the University of South Carolina. So you can see the years on the screen. After my master's, I began my career at IMP, but it was only for 6 months. I didn't like it at all, so I quit. And then I went to a different place, which actually began after the 1985 earthquake, the famous 1985 Michoacan earthquake in Mexico. So I was working there for almost 5 years. After my master's, I already felt that I wanted to pursue a PhD, but I couldn't do it. I got rejected by several universities. And I saw that as some sort of, I didn't see it as a defeat, but I saw it mostly as that I was too damn immature to pursue PhD. So I needed to get better. I needed to improve my language, and I needed to improve my resume. And that's what I tried to do while I was at the Center for Seismic Research. And the other great thing that happened there is that I met my wife there. Then after that, I became a Fulbright scholar, which was a big deal for me because CONACYT stands for the equivalent to the National Science Foundation in Mexico. Fulbright is a very famous program in the US, and IAE is the Institute of International Education. So I had the luck, or I had the opportunity, or I had the option to pursue my PhD during those years. Then after that, I came back to IMP in a rather unexpected way that I can describe later if someone is interested. Going back to the life-changing events, I'm going to make a few more comments on the last two bullets. So how come that I ended up pursuing my master's? And this may be of some interest to the younger guys listening to this. Well, I met Rick Williams, my master's advisor, back in 1984. He saw me presenting a paper based on my bachelor's thesis. It was the first time that I gave a presentation in English. I even read it. I was not proficient enough to give a presentation without reading it, but he thought it was very good. And we actually met during the dinner organized during this annual meeting of the Eastern section of SSA. So suggestion number one, go for dinners, go for lunches, don't miss those events because that's where you get to know people. And that's when I ended up getting my master's advisor because he invited me to visit the campus, the University of South Carolina campus, which was some sort of cultural shock because it was the old South in the US and it was a big deal, but I had the chance to interview with most of the main professors and they suggested me to apply for a master's degree there. And that's the way it went. Then the other one, the one in the lower portion. So I met Jerry Schuster, now a very famous professor. Almost everyone knows about him if you're doing exploration seismology. I remember writing him a letter after we met at the fall meeting of the American Geophysical Union. And I was presenting a paper based on the current professional work. And he invited me to go to Salt Lake City. And I've been going to Salt Lake City pretty much since 1988 till about 2010. I will explain later why. 2014, actually. And then, later on in 1991, I made my PhD advisor, again at a fall AGU meeting. And I was already applying for a PhD at Penn State. But he was moving from Penn State to Nevada. And that's how I ended up in Nevada, by pure accident, because he moved from Penn State to another state. Then they decided to accept me, mostly because of my scholarship, because I was never a great scorer in terms of GRE or any of those other fancy exams. I forgot to mention that during my master's, I was accepted without the GRE. And that happens when they think that you are reasonably good enough to pursue the education. So they can always grant you some sort of facilities or some sort of less requirements to actually come up with this. Then my wife and I got married, and then we moved to the US. Then what happens? This is the Jerry Schuster's group back in it was born back in 1987. I met him back in 1988. So most of my professional career has been influenced by the interaction with him and with his group. This group had a transition in 2010, and they went to KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And again, the interaction is still going on, even though we are not always able to fund them. And this will finish in a few more weeks. In February, he will close his consortium because he's getting close to retirement. Another big name in my life is Cord Marford, currently at the University of Oklahoma. But I met him because of Schuster. I met Marford back in 85, I think. No, wait, 95. And he was, 2005. Forgive me, 2005. And he was still at the time at the University of Houston. Then he moved to the University of Oklahoma. And these two guys, Schuster and Marford, have become in the last probably 10, 15 years my main influences in terms of suggestions, guidance, information. I was able to sponsor them through funding from PMEX and so on. So suggestion number 2, not only go for the meetings, dinners, and everything else, but get to know people, get to interact with people. Otherwise, you just get isolated. And if you end up thinking that you are too damn good, it will always be very relative, good as compared with who. And these guys are the ones that actually give you the better feeling for the level you really have, because they are the ones who keep educating people. They are the ones that keep developing not only algorithms, but new knowledge. And that's what you're really aiming for. So OU is not only famous for the football team, but they have been able to assemble a very fancy petroleum university. Now, professional service, that's also something we have to do. And you don't get money for this, but you get lots of learning, lots of personal experiences, lots of great times. And I was lucky enough to be the honorary lecturer for 2015. So I gave 24 talks in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Venezuela, and Trinidad and Tobago. And it was a really unforgettable time. Here are a few pictures just to let you witness how interesting it may be. Of course, it is interesting because you deal with young people, seasoned professionals, all type of interesting students and practitioners. And the main conclusion here is that serving your professional society can be very, very helpful. Don't expect money from this. Don't expect any of those things. It will essentially help you grow as a person. Mentoring people, that's also something that sometimes you don't get money from doing this. And in fact, you have to invest money in order to do it. And I've been doing it, teaching classes at UNAM, the school where I got my bachelor's degree. So I teach, or I try to teach, in the same bachelor's degree that I pursued and obtained. And how are you able to mentor people? Essentially by interacting with them. You can also be a mentor of your colleagues. They teach you and you teach them. They train you and you train them. It is a two-sided interaction and benefit. And I've been lucky enough to have the chance to train practitioners at PMEX and IMP, mostly at PMEX. And recently, in the past few months, I've been part of the Mentoring 365 effort, which is an SEG and AUU effort. Again, you do it for free. You do it because you want to. And what's the main deal here? I think you always try to be a positive influence, like the names that I mentioned before, the advisors, the guys I like to interact with. They keep you going. They really keep instilling and nurturing what we call critical thinking. And that's what you try to relay in younger and even older people. So I think I'm a firm believer that we all learn from each other, and we just try to transfer, to relay, to help in any way we can to become better people and better professionals. Not everything is geophysics. I mean, there is way more to life than geophysics. So you always have to read something else from different fields. You have to listen to music. You have to go to the museum, and you have to see the paintings. Or if you can, you should be able to paint. And if you want to play music, well, play it, whatever. If you like to travel, well, do it. This activity lets you travel. And that was one exciting part when I went into the field, that you are able to travel. And that's something that most of the people do want to do when we're in college. We want to travel. We want to see the world. Well, we are lucky enough in this activity to actually do it. And as the quote describes on the screen, that's essentially the package that you have to offer to the professional world. Not only your technical background, but also your emotional background, your culture, everything you've done in your life. Now, one of the main points of this webinar series is to suggest how we survive, how we can do it throughout the career. It is a path. There are different paths. So based on my experience and based on the everyday readings that I do, and let me recommend you a great one, which is called Leadership Freak. You can easily find it in LinkedIn, which is the Facebook of the professionals, or just go and Google Leadership Freak and you will find it. It is free. You read it every day. It's lots of interesting comments in less than 300 words, and you are reading 4 of them. So you have to let people know that they can count on you. That's really essential. You have to be reliable. You should not be able to isolate from the professional world. You have to keep interaction all the time, because as bottom left pinpoints, no one survives and thrives on their own. And something that I find very shocking with millennials and related crowds is that we don't always agree in the way we should follow our careers. And I agree completely with what is described in the bottom right. So long-term goals let you know where the hell you're going, and to some extent achieve what you may call success after you obtain a goal or you finish a degree or whatever activity you define beforehand. And the short-term goals help you in terms of your daily behavior, because you really have to build on your character. These days, most people talk about soft skills. And you can even take courses, you can even spend lots of money playing with that, but it's essentially a matter of how you face life. And it is relevant to be able to communicate. It is relevant to have the courage. It is relevant not to be shy. It is relevant, as the bottom right depicts, to be able to learn. Because even though you get your bachelor's, your master's, your PhD, whatever, you still keep learning. You don't know it all. You have to keep learning all the time. And I think that's something that you have to realize, or at least I was able to realize it when I went to the US the first time. So when I went for my master's, one of the main lessons that I learned was that I really needed from the other guys, I really needed to interact with them, and I had to learn all the time. You never really know that you have learned it all. It's more like it's a never-ending process. So here are what I may call some insights for building a career. To a large extent, you build the life that you want. So you have to know what the hell you want. If you don't know that, then you're lost. But to a large extent, I think we do really know what we want. And you have to aim for that. That implies that you really have to work hard. You really have to sacrifice lots of things. You have to be as honest as possible, as responsible as possible, and you have to keep some sort of integrity line. You don't have to define that, but at least let people know that you have any of these values to the extent that they get to know them. The most relevant points are, for me, in black. You have to trust yourself, because quite often you will be underestimated. Because you are small, because you are Mexican, because you are dark, because you are dumb, whatever. You have to trust your abilities, your knowledge, your character. And in order to do that, you have to be very patient, but you have to be some sort of a strategist. You have to be very careful and define your own strategy, which may be very different from others, and the road that you want to follow. You have to build that road, and that's the not so easy part. Networking, I already made comments about that, and I keep saying this in Spanish. Tienes que caer peleando. You have to go down fighting. That's like a modo. I mean, you never know if you're going to succeed. You just have to keep trying. And usually you will end up succeeding. And if you lose, well, then just try again. Summary. I have this in my office. I think it's kind of like the best suggestion that I ever got. The equivalent to just be yourself. And I tell this to pretty much everyone I get interaction with. But if we use bullets, you really have to be yourself. You have to be curious. You have to be humble. And this is essentially reinforcing the comment I made 2 slides ago. You should not give up. Now, how do you design your own career? How do you improve your own steps? How do you keep building the road that you are stepping on? Well, you have to gain technical credibility. And you don't need to be a PhD to be good. You don't need to be a master's to be good. You just have to be as well educated as possible. So higher degrees are helpful depending on what you want, but they are not the only option for most people. If you want to be a practitioner, you do not necessarily need to get a PhD. If you want to be a researcher, then you really need it. Otherwise, you will be at a disadvantage, and so on. Get to know people. Again, networking. That's very, very helpful. It is not enough to be good. You really need to know better people than you. You need to interact with them, and you need to help relay that knowledge with the younger, less experienced, or less knowledgeable people that you end up meeting in your daily activities. And as you notice from the introduction from Lori, if you notice from the resume that we included for this talk, I spend lots of time serving my professional community. And I think that's very, very relevant. In my book, it has given me lots of opportunities to meet people, to gain technical credibility, to be humble, and to be myself, which is essentially what I listed above. And finally, when you get really sad or complicated or where things are not going that well, you need to follow, and please look at YouTube for Stuart Smalley. Listen to that 1 minute daily affirmation, and I think you really need it. It's like a daily therapy. You really have to tell yourself when you're feeling down for whatever reason that you are simply good enough, that you are smart enough, and that people actually like you. And you really need it, I think, at least in my experience. Even though sometimes people get the feeling that we are very strong or we are very in command of our lives, lots of times you don't feel that way. Lots of times you have to be, again, very humble and you have to avoid giving up. Last part, the acknowledgments. Let me start with a quote from a very famous Polish geophysicist who has been the teacher of many, many people, which is Tad Ulrich. I have the pleasure of meeting Tad back in, I think it was 2005 or something like that. So he essentially says in the blue portion of the slide, always acknowledge the work of those on whose ideas your work is based. And referring to those whose inspiration inspire you will only bring you accolades and freedom from guilt. And I think this has to become like a model, because you essentially owe who you are and what you are to lots of people. In this case, for the webinar, I have to thank Lori, Jolimar, and Pamela. They suggested me some ideas in order to organize what you just listened to. Of course, all the people that have had something to do with my career, teachers, mentors, friends, sponsors, colleagues, former students, and what I call spiritual advisors, and of course, your family. And I think I'm ready for questions. Hopefully you have a few, and thanks much for your time and attention.
All right, if you'd like to ask some questions, please raise your hand in the interface or type your questions in the question and answer box. All right, I'll start. I have a question for you. Firstly, I really enjoyed your presentation. A lot of great and interesting information. But I was curious, you've done a lot of different things throughout your career and your education. What one thing, if possible, did you find the most challenging? Be either through your schooling or through your professional work.
I think the most challenging part is coming back to Mexico.
In what sense?
Oh, because those kind of stays abroad can be very relativistic. So you grow a lot, you feel you make a difference, and then you go back to the society where you think you belong. And it's not that easy to get adjusted to that, because they are not necessarily waiting for you. So you have to start your own road in your own society again. So it's a restarting process. It is a reset process. And that's very difficult. To me, that has been always the most difficult part.
Thanks. All right, this question comes from Liz. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for some years now, and I have sensed you are a big advocate of females in the field. Could you please tell us about how the role presence of females has changed throughout the years?
That's a big question for me. Females made a big deal in my education in the US. Not only classmates, but also people that I had to interact with. And without demeaning anyone, I have always learned the most from women. In terms of the human side, and in terms of what kind of a strategy we should follow, I think they tend to be smarter than men. Men claim they are better when it comes to the technical part, but that's a big, we would need some beers to discuss that. But to me, the best students I have had are essentially women. Some of the best professionals that I know are women. And as a friend of mine, Paul Singer from Estatoil says, if you cannot get along with women, you are losing 51% of the world's population. So that makes a big, big difference. You should learn, as a man, you should learn how to deal with women. Otherwise, I mean, you're lost.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? All right. There's one that came in the chat box. According to your experience, what is more important, pursuit of a PhD or master's degree if you want to belong to exploration and development oil companies?
I think several people would agree with what I'm going to say. If you only want to be a practitioner, don't go for the PhD. If you want more, go for the PhD. If you want to do research, if you want to do teaching, you will need the PhD. Otherwise, I think it is good enough to stop at the master's level. Now, when do you I remember, I think it was Pamela, one of the ladies that I listed at the end. She sort of asked me, how do you know when you're ready for one stage or the other? And I think you little by little get convinced that you're able to do the next step. So if you finished a master's and you're not sure about the PhD, well, then don't do it. But if you're convinced, you will do it. It doesn't matter if they tell you there is no money. It doesn't matter if they tell you there is no work. It becomes more like a personal conviction, and you just go for it. So hopefully I explained myself. So if you want to be a practitioner, you do not necessarily need a PhD. If you want to do research, then you do need it.
Okay, there's another question. Do you think it is also worthwhile to pursue non-technical or business degrees to work in the extractive resource industries?
That's something most of my American friends did in the US. I haven't done it, but most of my friends in the US have some sort of additional education, like an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. Or they go for an additional diploma. In Mexico, they're called diplomados. I've never done it, but I know several people consider that very useful, mostly when they get managerial jobs. When they become managers or directors, they have to learn how to deal with people. They have to learn how to manage money and people. So I think it is worthwhile. It also depends on your activity. Thank you, Paul, for asking. And thanks, Luz, for asking the previous questions.
All right, any additional questions? Please raise your hand or ask your question in the question and answer box. Okay, here's one. What's next for Sergio? So what are you going to be doing next?
Survive. That's enough for me. And I'm serious. Can I give more time to that?
Yes.
That's a tough question because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But I think you just keep tracing the road in the way that you see it and that you foresee it, and you just keep enjoying what you do. And luckily enough for me, I still enjoy most of what I do. So I'll just keep doing the same till I have enough strength to keep doing it. So, and that's what I call surviving.
Okay, that was a really good answer. The oil and gas industry has gone through different cycles, some very good and some not so good. The most recent downturn of the oil and gas industry has really challenged geophysicists to be flexible. Could you speak to being a continuous learner and how that could assist you when things are not so well?
Let me give a bit of background. when I pursued my master's back in 1985, 1986, there were geophysicists selling ties in Houston. There were no jobs. That was it was probably the worst turn down in the industry. We are still in the second one. And what I recall from the people in the first one is that they would just keep learning. They would just keep pursuing things. They would not give up. And that's something that I can say that I learned from the Americans. Not necessarily from the Mexicans, but from the Americans. How do you face stressful times? And I think you just have to keep going. And some of the people that were my classmates were able to find jobs in the US industry, despite of the most awful downturn. So, I mean, it's not a recipe, but I guess you just have to keep going. Mostly if you are convinced that this is what you want. If you're not convinced, then you have to give up and go somewhere else, move to another field. And just to finish my comment, I like to say this usually in Spanish, that if there were no more activity for geophysics, well, maybe I could be a tourist guide. Maybe I could translate for American Express or something. So education makes a difference, I think. So you have to keep educating yourself, even if you don't pay for that, even if you do it as on your own.
Okay, great. Here's another question from Armando. What would you do to encourage students that are not very motivated?
Well, Armando, that's tough. I'm going to use the words of someone I admire. There was a very famous earthquake engineer in Mexico. His name is Emilio Rosenbluth. I had the chance to meet him and interact with him in my older days. And I remember he used to say this about the students. He would say, the only thing I care about the students is that they are motivated. So I think if they are not motivated, we cannot really do anything for them. I mean, they may be dumb, they may be slow, they may be weak, but if they don't know what the hell they are doing, if they don't know why they are at school, I don't think we can do anything. I forgot to say this. I have to make a joke before finishing this comment. I love an expression from John McEnroe, the very famous tennis player, that he claims that the older he gets, the better he used to be. That's also how I feel. The older I get, the better I used to be. But the older I get, the better convinced I am that you cannot motivate a student that doesn't know why the hell he's at the university or in graduate school. So I guess my answer is very pessimistic. I don't think you can do it.
Okay. Another question has come in. What do you think about the gas exploration and the future of the oil industry?
That's a never-ending topic, and we have heard about it for decades. And unless the person who asks is a toddler, he will not see that in his time. I mean, there will be enough oil in our generation. This transition about renewable energy, okay, it is going on. It is something that offers options for lots of people, but still, we could easily convince the person who asked that there is enough oil for the next 1, 2, 3 decades. So I don't think, in my case, I don't think I will witness the end. I'm skeptical about that. But I try to be an informed skeptical.
Okay. Geoeconomical scenarios affect our careers. Does Mexico offer good opportunities to professionals that want to pursue research careers? How do you see scenarios today and the near future for the research in your country?
If you're a foreigner, there are great opportunities, and I don't mean about big bucks, big money. I mean about places that people find attractive to live. It is increasingly more common to hear about Germans, French, Italians, Argentinians, Venezuelans coming to Mexico to work for the academia. They are much better qualified than the Mexicans. I don't enjoy this comment, but that's a very common reality. They are much more qualified. Some of them get married with a local lady or a local gentleman. They fall in love with the country. They like the food. They like the places. Blah blah blah, and they find opportunities way better than in Europe, way better than in South America, without demeaning or offending anyone. I think there are good options. Mostly, if you feel there is something you like about this place. I think there are still pretty decent opportunities. If you only care about the money, I don't think it is the place to go.
Okay, thanks. There's another question. What was some of the most important things that your PhD advisor gave to you as far as guidance and suggestions, if you can summarize that?
The most important. Are you still watching the summary? If you take a look at the summary, the first bullet came from my advisor. Right before my PhD defense. And that's the most relevant piece of information I ever got from him. As short and as simple as that. I think you really have to be able to be yourself. So he didn't give a damn if I was Mexican, short, brown, whatever. He always looked for quality in what you did, for knowledge in what you said. So he fostered the first bullet. So that was his main contribution.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Sergio? All right. Well, Sergio, we are really just about out of time, so unless there's any additional questions, I think we should probably wrap this up.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I see no additional questions, so thank you, Sergio. Thank all of you for attending the SCG Latin America Regional Advisory Committee's webinar as part of our webinar series, A Path to a Career in Geophysics. Please look for our social media posts to register for next month's interesting talk, and keep an eye out for future talks as well. Thank you again for attending today, and thank you, Sergio, for a very interesting presentation. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you.